Big win for religious liberty yesterday at the Supreme Court. The court ruled 6-3 in Kennedy versus Bremerton School District that the school violated Coach Joseph Kennedy's rights when it fired him for kneeling and saying a private prayer after football games. The biggest takeaway is that religious freedom is not completely dead in America. But the second biggest takeaway, and this has been underreported, is that liberals have absolutely no idea what conservatives actually believe. Instantly, after the decision came out, a bunch of prominent libs on social media jumped at what they thought was going to be conservative hypocrisy. You saw a million variations of, well, if you think conservatives should be allowed to pray privately at school, then you probably think that Jews and Muslims should be allowed to do that too, right? Ha ha, gotcha. To which all of the conservatives replied, yep, sounds good. It wasn't the first time that we've seen this kind of thing. We were seeing this liberal disconnect for weeks after the Carson decision from the Supreme Court. If you think Christian students in Maine should be able to spend their education funding at Christian schools, then maybe Jews and Muslims should be allowed to spend it at their own schools, huh? Yeah, that's great. Sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. After the Dobbs decision, you want to ban abortion, huh? Well, maybe we should pass a law to make men support the women that they impregnate. What do you think about that? I think that's a great idea. Where do I sign up for that? Cool. Let me co-sponsor that. You don't like gay marriage, huh? Well, if you're such a defender of marriage, what if we made it harder for straight couples to get divorced? Awesome. Right. You support the Second Amendment, huh? So you think it's fine for black men to own guns? I do, yes. 1 in 4 black men in America already own guns, and black rifles and black people, they're both great in my book. The list goes on and on. It is a huge political weakness for the libs. I think it probably explains in part why conservatives have been making such unusual gains in recent years. If you want to defeat your opponent, the first thing that you've got to do is try to understand your opponent. Right now, the conservatives generally understand what motivates the libs. And the libs don't have even the foggiest notion of what motivates us. It's not even just the radical libs who have no idea what conservatives believe. It's even the squishy conservatives, the center left, the former conservatives. David Frum, who was a speechwriter during the Bush administration, he was a vaguely kind of conservative guy, and now he's a sort of center liberal guy. He tweeted out after the Kennedy case, after the case that vindicated the football coach for praying privately after the football games. He said, Supreme Court opens way for rousing chants of Allahu Akbar before high school sporting events. You conservatives, because David Frum's idea here is that the conservatives, while they're celebrating the Christian being able to pray privately after the football games, the conservatives hate Muslims. And so if the Muslims pray, we're really going to hate that, right? Which to me is not only false, it not only rings false, it rings extremely dated. Though I suppose it makes sense coming from Frum, because Frum came to prominence during the Bush years. And during the Bush years, it was at least commonly believed that the Muslims, they're our real enemy. The radical Islamic extremists, they're the real threat to civilization. I suspect today it feels a little bit different, doesn't it? Which group do you think poses a greater threat to your way of life and to your kids and to your rights and to your country? Do you think it's the Muslims, or do you think it's the radical leftists? I got to tell you, these days, if I'm saying what's the most immediate threat, look, Islam, the Muslim groups have been invading the West since the 7th century. So I'm not saying there's no threat there. Battle of Lepanto, Battle of Vienna, Battle of Poitiers. Listen, this is a long-standing tradition, okay? But today, right now, in the year of our Lord, 2022, what poses the greatest threat to me? Islam or radical leftism? It's radical leftism, no question about that. We're talking about schools. I would much sooner send my child to a madrasa than I would send him to most woke public schools, because whatever differences I have with the Muslims, on matters of theology, philosophy, and the like, at least the Muslims aren't going to try to convince my son he's a little girl, okay? Whatever disagreements I have with the Islamic world, frankly, the claims that are made by radical leftism, boys are secretly girls, babies aren't really babies. Everyone who built our civilization is evil. There is no God. All the claims of the radical left are way more dangerous than whatever claims are being made by the Muslim world. But people don't quite get that. People don't quite, they really believe, someone like David Frum, I guess, or the rest of these guys, they really believe that conservatives, we just hate Muslims. And it's just not true. It's just, is it true? You ask yourself. If you are a conservative, if you're center right, is that really what you think the fear is? Allahu Akbar at high schools? A Muslim or a Jew or making a private prayer? No, I think the far greater risk to our civilization comes from atheism. Business Insider, I think they've rebranded just to Insider. This is a very far left-wing news outlet. They're very upset that Gen Z right now is going to be having less sex. Actually, Gen Z doesn't have a lot of sex. They have very open, promiscuous views on sex, but they have less real-life actual sex than previous generations. Headline, swearing off men and avoiding intimacy, Gen Z reconsiders sex in the wake of a post-Roe world. Madeline V. might be done with men altogether. A 24-year-old marketing assistant who identifies as bisexual, Madeline, who asked that Insider only use her first name, has decided that sticking to female partners may be the safest sexual route these days. It's not a fear of men, exactly, that has inspired this young woman to consider swearing off an entire gender. It's the heightened fear of unwanted pregnancy and a subsequent lack of options that has forced Madeline to proceed with sexual caution in the wake of Friday's Supreme Court decision gutting federal abortion rights protections. Right, so Insider, this left-wing outlet, is writing this as though this should be horrifying to everybody. It's just like those people at the top of the show. It's not that she fears and hates men, it's that she doesn't want to have an unwanted pregnancy if she's not allowed to kill her child. So now she's going to be a little more sexually cautious. Great. Good. That's sort of the point. That's good for the baby, obviously, the baby who will not be killed through abortion. But it's good. It's good for society that we won't have this sexual chaos everywhere. But it's good for Madeline. It's good for Madeline too. Does anybody still seriously believe, years after Me Too, years after the Enough is Enough movement, does anyone seriously believe that hookup culture is really, really good for women? The article goes on. I wish I could read the entire article for you. They say, quoting a young woman, surprisingly enough, I've actually had dreams where I'm pregnant and I can't find a way to take care of myself. Adeline said, correcting herself, saying the visions were more akin to nightmares. She can't find a way to take care of herself. What about a husband? Have you thought if you become pregnant, it's probably not going to happen because, you sit on a toilet seat. If you become pregnant, it's going to happen because you have sex with somebody. What if, hear me out, I know this is crazy, what if you do what everyone did throughout all of human history until about 40 years ago and marry that person? And then you don't need to worry about just taking care of yourself. You will have a husband who will go out and make money for you and provide food and shelter for you, and you can raise the family, and you can do some work yourself as well, but you won't have to carry that whole heavy load yourself. You'll have something that's called a family. So family, this is an old-fashioned concept. It existed, well, as recently as, a couple decades ago, but a family is when people come together in something called a marriage. And a marriage, I know we've changed all the definitions and nothing means anything anymore, but a marriage is when a man and a woman come together and they love each other, ideally, and then they produce a child, like you're saying, well, that part would have come first, but whatever, that's okay. And you come together and then you live together, and you can even make more children and you can have a good life if you want. Or you can just continue to live alone in a sort of miserable, isolated, alienated existence, working for some other guy at a company, another guy who doesn't care about you and will throw you under the bus the second that you're no longer profitable to him. And you, instead of sleeping with 100 different men, none of whom care about you at all, you can just sleep with your husband, and instead of killing your own children, you can actually give birth to them and raise them and have a loving, wonderful existence. I know it's radical and crazy. I'm being obviously somewhat humorous here in the way I'm describing it, but I actually think people probably do need to hear it. I actually think that the younger generations who have been raised in the madness of the sexual revolution and in the wake of the sexual revolution probably don't think about these things all that much, because the hookup culture is just ubiquitous. It's just the way that things are. The idea of getting married young and staying married and having kids and having a good life, it's a foreign concept. Frankly, it was a somewhat foreign concept even when I was a teenager growing up in liberal places. I can't even imagine now. Ever since the draft decision was leaked, Adeline has had to entirely rethink whether or not she wants to start having sex, telling Insider that she's terrified to make a choice that could leave her with an unwanted child. Oh, good. Catherine said she's been left to reevaluate the consequences of casual sex that have suddenly become very real. Awesome. Great. She says, as much as I want to have fun in my 20s, what happens to me when the fun stops? What happens to me when I might be in need of an abortion and can't access that? What happens when the fun stops? Great question to ask yourself. In hookup culture, if you're just hooking up, you don't just bring up that stuff right away normally, she said. But when it comes to if you're actually going to sleep with someone, I think at this point, that definitely needs to be addressed. This is really great stuff. The hookup culture is terrible for everyone. It's very enticing. It's very tempting. I know it seems fun at the time, but ultimately it's not fun and it makes everybody miserable. It's also probably the primary driver of the rape culture hysteria that was going on in recent years and the Me Too movement and all of that. None of that would have been possible without a culture that encouraged promiscuous sex. Obviously, rape would still happen, but the idea of a rape culture, this pervasive, endemic sort of men exploiting women and pressuring women, and Harvey Weinstein saying, come on up to my hotel suite, and these drunken rendezvous that occur all over colleges and bars where consent is very unclear, and the lines that people want to engage in, they're blurred lines. None of that would be possible without the sexual revolution and a culture of promiscuous sex. And the consequences of that have been disastrous, especially for women. But the main reason I want to bring up this article is not even all of that. It's to remind conservatives of a very important truth, namely, culture very often is downstream of politics. You know, Andrew Breitbart had that famous line, politics is downstream of culture, which is true in as much as the movies matter and the press matters and books matter and private civic associations matter. Yeah, that's all true. But politics is downstream of culture is a slogan, and like all slogans, it cannot convey the whole of reality. And if politics is downstream of culture is taken to its extreme, it's nothing more than an excuse for conservatives and libertarians to ignore the political order and actual government and the power that the people happily give us on occasion. Culture can be downstream of politics too. The example that I frequently use is East and West Germany. East Germany was conquered by the Soviet Union for the latter half of the 20th century. West Germany remained free, remained part of the West. West Germany has very high rates of people who believe in God today. East Germany is almost entirely atheist. Why is that? Is that because of regional variations in bratwurst and Bavarian donuts? No, it's because East Germany was dominated by an officially atheist regime for 40 years. That's why. These women are showing you this right now. They're saying, gosh, you know, when the law was a certain way, I engaged in this kind of behavior in my private life. But now that the law is different, I'm going to behave in a different way. This is something that we have known throughout all of history and that somehow conservatives and libertarians forgot for the last 30 or 40 years. But the law is a teacher. The law shapes society. Conservatives and libertarians especially are so good at understanding incentives, but we seem to forget that when it comes to the law. When you create legal incentives for certain behaviors, you get more of them. When you create legal disincentives for certain behaviors, you get less of them. The incentives and disincentives created by Dobbs are absolutely magnificent, and we should double down on it, have much more pro-life legislation throughout the states. It will not only be good for the babies, though it obviously will be, it will be good for everyone involved. If you enjoyed that clip from The Michael Knowles Show, make sure that you check out the rest on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, and most importantly of all, because we need your support, become a Daily Wire member. Go to dailywire.com/Knowles. Access an entire library of exclusive content and use code Knowles for 25% off your new membership today. dailywire.com/Knowles. Code Knowles. What's my name? Knowles. See you next time.